Hi, everybody. Thank you guys for coming to Orca's first in-person event in about 2 years. So as a reminder, we're recording the event behind you, so just mind talking levels while our speaker is speaking. So we can listen to our speaker, and now we will begin recording. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Orca Books Co-op's first live reading in 2 years, and a discussion of The Last Sandstorm by Jasmin Faulk-Dickerson. In her memoir, The Last Sandstorm, Jasmin Faulk-Dickerson tells the story of her first 25 years in Saudi Arabia before her daring escape to the West. The author was born in the 1970s and grew up amid the shadow of Riyadh, a city that was emerging into economic modernity, a sharp contrast with its archaic treatment of women. This memoir is both a coming-of-age story and an in-birth saga, two overlapping narratives that are told with generosity, humor, and a pervasive sense of longing and loss. The narrative documents what it means to grow up with unanswered questions, strive to conform and belong, and finally dare to leave behind a family, a country, and the way of life, the known world. In turn, Faulk-Dickerson invites us to take measure of our own potential and to participate fully in our own lives. While Jasmin experienced the privileges and privations of being female in a conservative Muslim regime, she survived and thrived by daring to imagine an entirely different kind of life. Jasmin shares the particulars of her daily life, school, Muslim customs, popular culture, family life, friends, that create a palpable sense of what it's like to be loved, but also glorious by circumstances. Out of sight of the professors, Jasmin became an aficionado of pop culture, drawing on music, dance, film, and TV icons from Europe and the United States. In the privacy of her own bedroom and studio, she became an artist, performer, and feminist freedom fighter. A magnificent leap of faith that eventually translates to the courage to lead. After the reading, there will be a short discussion. If you have questions, just raise your hands. And without further ado, I would love to invite Jasmin to read. Thank you so much.
I'm so excited to be here. I just took my mask off, so if I have these lovely lines, you know, it's the current fashion. So some of you may have read the book already or started reading it, and some of you may have not. I will jump in and read a section somewhat at the beginning, but also a little deeper in. So some of the information sort of is built earlier as well. This chapter is called Juvenescence, and it starts to introduce the teenage version of myself and some kind of bits and pieces of life during that time. Juvenescence. I started grade school speaking Italian and English fluently, but very little Arabic, which immediately put me at odds with my new classmates. I was 5 years old when I started first grade in the big and fancy private school, nothing like the sweet French Lebanese home-based kindergarten I attended previously for 2 years, where I also learned to learn French. I opened the door of my classroom and stood still, almost frozen at the sights before me. There were at least 20 girls running wild around the classroom, all of us in the same red uniform. They were laughing, shouting, and speaking Arabic. No teacher in sight. I scanned the room and quickly noticed one girl quietly sitting at the desk. She was lighter complexion and strawberry blonde hair. I darted towards her, sat next to her. In English, I said, "Hi, I'm Jasmin. I'm Italian." I noticed her green eyes when she looked at me. "Hi, I'm Arwa. I'm Dutch." Phew, I had a friend. Like me, Arwa was half European and half Middle Eastern. We became each other's safety blanket all the way through school. The school I attended had become my second home. I spent 12 years in what at the time was the most highly regarded private school in the region. It was owned by then Prince Salman, the King of Saudi Arabia today. The largest percentage of Saudi royal offspring attend the school. Notably, the school was for boys and girls who were segregated in different campuses. School days were Saturday through Wednesday. The weekends consisted of Thursday and the Islamic Moon Day Friday. On the drive to school each morning, my brother Yasser offered to DJ and listened to his mixtapes. Jackson's, Prince, Phil Collins, All Notes, the Bee Gees, Sliver, all of this music just came out as our favorite hits of the 80s. Our driver dropped Yasser off at the boys' gate every morning, while my mom, sister, and I entered together to the girls' gate. My mother was a well-respected and much-loved head English teacher. For the most part, I found school fun and an opportunity to understand who I was and where I belonged. Once I started school, I knew we were different because I saw how the girls were divided based on cultural and social backgrounds. My sense of belonging was exhibited, and I spent most of the time physically impact, but emotionally alone with my thoughts. I don't have a memory of myself without my mind racing constantly. My thoughts draw on hamster wheel, no destination or finish line in sight. Years later, I realized why meditation improved me and how it became the indispensable anchor in my life, stopping the wheel from turning and soothing my empty thoughts. Because I attended the same school for 12 years, I became good friends with many of the girls in my grade. We were divided by unspoken barriers. There were the royal family girls, the Nejdi girls from the central region of Saudi Arabia, Nejd, the Hijazi girls from the western region of Saudi Arabia, Hijaz, the non-Saudi Arab girls, Palestinians, Jordanians, Lebanese, Egyptian, etc., and the group I belonged to, the Western girls, or the Hafis, the mixed Arab girls with usually Saudi fathers and Western mothers or European American mothers. We were the girls who spoke English, the Americanized girls, the ones who knew about pop culture and dressed in the coolest and most recent trends, usually underneath our uniform or at our frequent all-girls weekend gatherings. We eventually referred to ourselves simply as the Hafis. With the Hafis, I came close to being myself. We could talk about our favorite pop stars, flip magazines, drool all over the theme park clubs and magazines, and talk about our summer crushes during our travels. Our friendships were supported by our parents, who were also good friends. Some of our dads had been educated together, and our moms had become each other's support system in this foreign land that we now call home. When I was younger, our families socialized together quite often. But as we got older, the teens gathered at a different house on the weekend, and the adults would have adult evening parties once a month. I got to go to the teen gatherings that were girls only. We informally rotated locations. The monthly gatherings were usually themed birthdays. Our costume parties brought to life famous movie stars, pop stars, comic book heroes, and mythical warriors. Cheese curls, chocolate chip cookies, brownies, and mini club sandwiches were dispersed throughout the party room, along with Tang or Kool-Aid if you were in America. The first time I tasted buttered popcorn, I thought someone had spit in the bowl. The wet, soggy texture of the crunchy popcorn kernel was organic. During my adolescence, my parents became stricter than the other parents, following the cultural rules and social laws which I was introduced to. My sense of loneliness and feeling different became even more intense as I became isolated physically and emotionally. My development was now in the charge of adults who regarded seemingly impossible cultural mandates. Because I was an adolescent girl, I was barred from the surprises that feed the imagination and inspire ambition and autonomy. These same strictures bonded together many of the peers who have remained friends. I ended up a lone wolf, perhaps in touch with a couple of them, but not part of this vibrant friendship village that still prospers as they have become aunties and uncles and challenge children and share a bond that's fragrant with childhood and adolescent memories. In Saudi Arabia, the only country in the world where women did drive until June of 2015, families of most classes, upper middle, and even lower classes, had a live-in driver and maid. Over the decades, we had live-in couples from Pakistan, Bangladesh, the Philippines, and Indonesia. They were part of our family, and we depended on them, not just for their services, sometimes for their emotional support. When my siblings and I were very young, the housekeeper, who was also our nanny, was like an auntie, and the driver like an uncle. As we grew older, they became more like sisters and brothers. My parents were full-time professionals, which meant that there were cycles in my young life when I spent most of my time with the help and not with my parents. We learned words in their languages, and they just about perfected Italian and Arabic after being in our home for many years. During the 1980s, 3 different sets of couples from all from the same Filipino family lived with us at a different age. Today, I can say a few basic things today, I can cuss you out today, and I feel like I'm around members of my own family. That sensation of relatedness taught me early on that we create our bonds and ties with fellow humans on a much deeper level than friends. Despite my internal loneliness, I noticed how comfortable I was around people who shared my non-Arab side, like the nannies and my happy friends. My relationship with my paternal relatives was superficial and uncomfortable. My siblings and I were too different from them. My uncles adored us. Each time I felt a tap on my shoulder during family gatherings, I turned to see who it was before I noticed my straight uncle Thomas suspiciously looking the other way and singing in Arabic. It's not me, it's the birdie. Before long, I caught on and realized this was our special game. Their wives and children, however, did not share the same affectionate sentiment. No, we can't play with these today, they're broken, one of my cousins would say in imperfect Arabic for my benefit, when I asked to play with a set of plastic pots and pans, which looked perfectly intact. My uncle's wives often changed the subject when we walked into the room. I used to think it was because my Arabic was poor, but as my Arabic improved, nothing changed on their part, although my perception became implicitly more skewed. Puberty, like so many things in Saudi Arabia, put a stop on our familial assembly. My Saudi relatives lived the traditional Saudi blend of old cultural practices along with fundamental conservative Islamic beliefs. The girls wore long dresses and the boys traditional Saudi coats. The men and women did not socialize in the same space. There were gender-designated living rooms in all the homes, including ours for this purpose. Our gatherings with cousins revolved around food, gossip exchanged among the older, illiterate women, and talks of few tailored gowns and shopping excursions. On occasion, the conversation turned to a TV show broadcast on one of the two Saudi public channels, which some of the younger girls happened to watch. But that was the extent of any social, artistic, political, intellectual, or controversial topic in our obligatory together. One evening at my Uncle Muhammad's home when I was a tween, my mom, my sister May, and I sat with the aunts and female cousins in the over-the-top floral pattern decor of the baby's living room. Cultural and social segregation included extended family gatherings. When we heard one of the elder male cousins clear his throat, that was a signal that a man was about to enter the room and pay his respects. The women were given a few seconds to cover their faces as required by Wahhabism, one of the most conservative Islamic sects practiced in most Saudi regions. Women do not cover from the males in their families to whom they cannot be married, such as a father, a grandfather, father-in-law, uncle, nephew, brother, and son. But all other males, not including great-grandfathers, grandsons, and great-uncles, are potential husbands, including a brother-in-law and a cousin. And therefore, women are expected to be veiled and practice discreet minimal interactions. When my elder cousin entered the room, the only ones left uncovered were the prepubescent girls and his mother and sister, as well as my mother, my sister May, and me. From the doorway, he paid his roll of respects to all the elder women and cousins one by one, skipping me and my sister, and respectfully greeting my mother, oddly in English, even though she too spoke Arabic. "Hello, Onyasa, how are you?" he asked obligatorily, formally referring to my mother as customs demanded by her status as Yasa's mother. "I'm well. How come you didn't greet my daughters?" she asked in English, as to not make a scene in front of the other women. His response, again in English, still echoes in my ears today. "When your daughters cover as they should, I will greet them as well." My stomach turned. It was as if his comments sucked the air out of the room. The humiliation was witnessed by all, even those who did not understand what the words expressed. I knew our relationship changed forever that day. I also knew that my identity had been inexorably uncovered, just like my rejected unveiled face. My mother said nothing the rest of the visit, and I followed her cue. When we got in the car with my father to head home, all she said was, "Aziz, I will not be taking the girls to your brother's homes anymore. If the uncles want to see them, they will come visit us at our home." My father didn't need to ask what happened, and as the man of few words that he was, he didn't say anything in response either. That was the beginning of the end of our relationship with my Arab relatives. Over the years, we remained respectfully close to my uncles, and the males maintained cordial relationships with my brother. But that was without question what triggered my personal identity crisis about my belonging and heritage. My social life was pre-designed by cultural formulas, and my creative side was bound by the lack of outlets and opportunities. Nothing compelled me, challenged my curiosity, or ignited retreat until 1983. That was when Michael Jackson's Thriller became the biggest selling album of all time. I was hooked from the time I saw the video clip of Motown 35 Village performance. I spent hours watching his videos, listening to his music, imitating him, and his sense of style. Within a short time, I had become the biggest and best Michael Jackson impersonator of my generation. Michael Jackson and I became synonymous. He represented freedom. He was not bound by his gender or his race, but rather presented an infusion of all mirroring aspects of self-expression. He was a singer, a dancer, a performer, an entertainer, a storyteller, a fashionista, and a humanitarian. I was thrilled. The world of dance and artistic expression became the one constant I had to fall back on. Always in the privacy of my bedroom or small social gatherings with girlfriends, for comfort, escape, and for survival. In the bathroom, I used several products in the attempt to hold a couple of shiny Jerry curls, but my fine straight hair did not cooperate. Can I get a perm? I finally asked my mom one day. I don't think so. You're too young and it's expensive, was her reply. I flashed back to the time she had a stunning salon-style afro in the late 1970s, but didn't have the courage to challenge her. When the king of pop shockingly died in 2009 at the age of 50, I received messages and phone calls from relatives and friends that I hadn't spoken to in years. Apparently, I was the first person they thought of when they heard the news. I mourned his passing because he was a symbol that embodied my aspirations during the most challenging part of my adolescence. My love for dance and music consumed the greatest part of my teen and teen years. With no freedom and a great deal of time on my hands, I spent my days and nights playing music, composing on the keyboard and piano, writing songs, and dancing. By the mid-'80s, breakdance and the whole pop-rock phenomenon had also made its way secretly inside radio. It was taboo, but young kids my age were spinning and moonwalking devotedly, like most other teens and preteens around the world. The Michael Jackson explosion was so powerful, and in a country that had never seen anything from the West invade with such impact, not even Elvis and the Beatles had made their way to the desert of the kingdom, it was viewed as a threat by the elders and especially the conservatives. On the rare occasion that I went to the cassette stores with my mom, I spent all my money on Michael Jackson merchandise. I still remember the time we walked to the 747 stereo store by our house and saw no trace of Michael Jackson anywhere. I was confused and I felt a pit in the stomach. I knew this was a bad sign. Within a year, any and all traces of Michael Jackson in stores, cassettes, posters, and memorabilia were destroyed and erased by the McFarlane, the religious police of Saudi Arabia, officially known as the Committee for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice. Many of us continued to be devoted Michael Jackson fans, but had to find ways to safely smuggle his music and videos into the country without being caught. Having ties and friendships with members of the royal family afforded us such advantages. For a couple of years during that time frame, my best friend at school was the daughter of then Frank bin Abdullah bin Abdulaziz, the former king of Saudi Arabia, who passed away in 2015. Maha and her two sisters were a deep friendship that filled the void of the separation and the Torrid gatherings that my parents had imposed. Most of my happy friends were meanwhile still experiencing those Torrid gatherings adjunct to the girls-only gatherings. I spent many weekends at the royal compound, where my brother too went to visit Maha's half-brothers, each set of double siblings living in a different palace with their respective mothers. It was easy to become friends with Maha because she had no full-blooded brothers. In her home, where she lived with her mother, Princess Rani, there was no boys, only her three sisters and a very large number of nannies, drivers, and servants. My weekends at the royal palace began with the bride and our Buick from my home to the main gates of the royal compound, where we passed several Mercedes and Rolls-Royce parked in the exposed garage and cobblestone driveway. There was an Olympic-sized pool, ATVs, horses, movie rooms, and my personal favorite, a discotheque. We spent hours choreographing Michael Jackson dances, breakdance routines, and we even took on the nicknames Ozone and Turbo from the cult movie Breaking, starring another one of my biggest heroes, the late Adolfo Chabadis. Yet when I put on that fedora glove and my boots, I came to life, and by request often entertained Princess Rani and all her friends. I was 10 or 11 years old, but I felt like a rock star, so alive and so fulfilled.
Sure. So I have two questions to share, but if the audience has questions, please raise your hand. Thank you for getting to go see Orlando in your lap. This is the best place ever. So Jasmin, your memoir begins with reflections on your childhood and your parents, and early on you outlined some relationships with witnessing. You have the line, I came to realize that my father known to observation. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about the connection between witnessing and life.
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. So, as a child, because I lived in a very conservative culture, there was very little spoken and very little expressed. And so a lot of the things that occurred before me were things I observed. And as you can see with art, like finding a way to sort of channel that and understand it. And I do say in the book that my father was like a puzzle, where there were all these pieces that I tried in my life to put together. So painting a picture and putting it into words, writing, expressing myself over the years helped me to understand and reconstruct my life. At the time, it was all very, very confusing, but also I didn't know any better. I didn't know any other way. So yeah,
Thank you. And for Henry, you also talk about these really beautiful rebellious women that you meet in your life, teachers, friends, activists, people who either personally, and I found you encountered, one of my favorite lines that you write is, Oprah was dangerous. She was a threat to weight and also women. And can you talk a little bit about why you wanted to include these women in your memoir and the importance of knowing rebellious women also?
yeah. Well, as a girl in a culture that tells you you are literally by law half the work of a man, you kind of think like, why? What's going on? What's missing? Like, why was I born a girl, first of all? And second of all, who decided that girls were half the value of a man? So that was like the trigger for me that made me feel very, very feminist without even knowing what that was. And I was like really indignant about it. So that was on one hand, one of the ways I thought about that. As I grew older, my mom, who's always been a safe presence in my life, was also, I think, burdened by the responsibility of making sure that we felt safe, somewhat conformed for our own safety and happiness and for our own peace of mind. And so in her, I couldn't see what I was feeling. So I needed to like find someone that would tell me it's okay to like go against the grain. It's okay to say no and to challenge it. And so, I mean, truly, my life was so consumed with idols because I just needed to see something that I could aspire to do.
Thank you.
And there's nothing greater than I think. No, that's all the other men, including my husband.
I love that you were questioning at an early age, like who decided the schools, and can you speak a little bit more about the other people around you who were also asking questions, the relationship of just asking questions with other
Yes, there is a very alive and healthy community of women of women in parts of the world. I mean, I'm sure you all know this. You hear the stories, you see the movies, you read the books of women who don't accept, right, what's going on. Oftentimes at the detriment of their own safety. And I was lucky because I had friends who felt the way I felt, had the similar experiences. I also want to mention my generation is the first product of these bicultural parents. In Saudi Arabia, prior to my parents' generation, there was no intermarriage. It just didn't exist. So we were an experiment. We were the guinea pigs. And so we had to figure it out. And so, yeah, it forced us to be sort of, I created this in the word. It was like, it was survival. Like, all I could think of it. It was just a way to really find a sense of safety, to be able to just be and not, well, yeah, I even say in the book, I really understand and appreciate when people, know who they are and society tells them they're not or they can't be. And I really relate to the LGBT community where there's this like default in society that says you need to do this and this or this or that. And this just denial of who you really are. So I think that's the closest I can describe as for you.
Yeah, so that's amazing. Speak a little bit more to that. When you're kind of discovering that intersectionality like doesn't exist as any category that you get placed into, so you kind of exist like uncategorizable. And when you kind of came to that notion and knowing that it was not your job to categorize yourself, thinking yourself over the lessons.
Yeah, that was, so your question is when did I realize that? Yeah, I think I'm still working on that. I really am. I mean, we still live in a world where every day we're getting to know more and more of ourselves. I definitely was, growing up very androgynous. I did not, as feminist as I was, I did not like how women have to be portrayed, sexy and feminine and all that. And at the same time, I felt like a, strong feminist, and I had a strong identity to my my own gender. And I think a big part of that with autistic people especially is that fear of being, and still today, even at home with my sons and my husband, it's like, don't tell me what I need to do, don't tell me how to be. It's like, just don't give me rules. I can't do the rule thing, you know? So to answer the question is, that's something that I still feel every day. It's something that's allowed me to be more and more empathetic and compassionate, even with those who I disagree with, which is really hard nowadays. But you know, you really have to put that in perspective.
Awesome, thank you. Could you speak a little bit more about how like your art helps facilitate that knowledge, and how art influences that empathetic ability when you are discovering things in your activity?
Well, I was lucky to be a product of the 70s and 80s, the best music ever. So there's a lot of music that tells you about, you know, all the, social justice, you know, the Bob Dylan, the John Lennon's, all that, you know, that music that really just made you think. And equally, there were Italian artists who were saying the same things. So artistically speaking, that was the space where I felt the safest, because no one can penetrate the thought, no one can penetrate the feeling while I was listening to the music or while I was dancing and performing. There was no possibility for anyone to destroy that. And so while it may to others appear that that was a prison, because it also was so freeing, because I was able to just go there and no one had an idea. There was no way for them to know what thoughts I was in.
Thank you. I'm thinking about a relationship that you write about in your memoir with a boy named Franco who's dating as a teen, and kiss, and later discovered he has a girlfriend, and then fascinating me from penthouse with that girlfriend, and he's a confessor. And it's really amazing. You're 16 when this happens, and you over your showing that this great moral value of solidarity with women and honesty with women, and that's something that you carry throughout the rest of your memoir. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that solidarity and honesty.
So keep in mind, I grew up in a culture where I didn't feel safe with the women that were out, because I was not like that. So I felt very rejected. So there was this constant need for me to find my belonging place, preferably with women, where we could help each other. In Italy, which my mom's Italian, so in Italy, I felt like I was around people and women that felt more like me. So that was kind of the start of it, probably. But I think the other part was the fact that I think the indignance of how men get away with everything and do what they want to do and treat women the way they want to treat them. This boy that I kissed had a girlfriend and didn't tell me he had a girlfriend. We were flirting together all summer, secretly. And then I find out that he has a girlfriend. So I felt mortified because it was my first kiss. I felt guilty that I kissed the boy. I felt guilty because in my culture this was wrong. I felt like a sinner. I also had a boyfriend. I was starting to have a boyfriend. So in my mind, there was someone back home that I was supposed to go back to and marry. And so there was like all this guilt. I think it's the guilt that made me feel this is the time for me to establish how I want to live with women and the sisterhood. And by the way, I'm from Vietnam, this is the focus. We're still Vietnam. Yeah. And I have not seen her talk to Francis. Oh yeah.
So in America, there's sometimes this culture of pitting women against each other as a competition. And do you ever encounter this before growing up?
Sadly, yes. That is a global dilemma. I think there's two ways women relate in Middle Eastern cultures. There is the sisterhood of sharing the maternal journey, mothering, the family journey. There's that, and that I will say there's a very beautiful aspect of how they create that village together, that support system. And I think I was lucky to sort of have that in my blood and share that here, because I have great number of friends here as well. So that is a very, very natural part of that sisterhood. Sometimes even like multiple wives of the same guy will end up being like sister wives. But then there was the competition outside of that in society, where as women started to be educated and as the workforce became a thing, there was more of a sense of self that I think made women see themselves beyond just breasts that feed babies and lives that disabilities has been, I think they started to think of themselves as a different identity. At least this is my experience. And so there was a lot of that. And I'll add, in that culture, just like I think in the Western culture, if you're just a little different, there's immediately this thing where it goes, whoa, like, yeah, we can't relate. You're different, you're weird, you're a threat. There's that right away. So unfortunately, that's kind of the dilemma I think that women are experiencing in different cultures for different reasons.
Thank you so much. There's another portion of your memoir in which a man in your vicinity is kind of talking over a derogatory way, and he questioned him by asking, like, is she a threat to you? And I thought that was so smart, and I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to how you were able to identify that when there is this talking down to women or about women, it is a sensation of like, well, why is her power threatening, or is it that she's seen as a threat?
Yeah. Now, by this point in the book, I have visited the United States a couple of times. I've been to Europe, of course, many times visiting my family, and I was already an adult, very young adult, but I was an adult. I was in 2021. And so, and I was watching Oprah religiously, and I was hearing the message, you own your life. This is, and so when the guy started to mock Oprah again, very, very disrespectfully, I just thought to myself, he thinks he's funny, first of all, so rude. And I snap into my Italian side in those moments where I'm like, hey, wait a minute, like, what's going on here? Why are you threatened? And I think that shocked him. It shocked him, and I hope it made him think. I doubt it, but I think in that moment, when I saw that by me saying that, I didn't get attacked, I didn't get killed, I didn't get, I was like, okay, I can start pushing my boundaries. So I think for me, to some extent, there was always this like, and I know my mom probably, was like, oh, you can just like not all the time, but like there was a part of me that always felt like, how far can I go to see, the next time, just like an inch, just a little farther. So that was one of those moments. I was like, I'm gonna just say it to a guy, to a man, to an Arab man, and say it to his face. Are you threatened? And to my surprise, I was not attacked. So it worked in my favor.
Awesome. I'm wondering if you could also speak a little bit about what you just mentioned, entering that workforce, kind of for the first time in which women are having a different relationship with work. And you worked at a school early on. I wondered if you could talk about your solidarity with women in that circumstance, and one of the circumstances with the supervisor who offered you another woman's job, and how you responded to that.
Yeah, I worked in a small private school, and I was an English teacher there, and the director of the English department was an American woman married to a Saudi, and I respected her. I thought she was great. She was very encouraging and supportive of me. And but the school was owned by a Saudi woman, and there still is probably this culture in Saudi Arabia where Saudis are above all, and everyone else is second. And there was this kind of pressure to turn everything very like Saudi, like Saudis is what we call it. Saudis everything. But Saudis in employment, it raises the status and all that stuff, right? So here are women showing the world that women work, and so I was asked to consider, pushing myself, and then eventually taking the position of being the director of the women's or the director of the English department, which meant it would have removed him, the American woman who was there. And I was mortified. I mean, the idea that they would do that just because of the nationality, I knew it wasn't because, I was the greatest thing ever and every time I was in that position. I knew that for them it was a number on the paper. It was for their own status. Again, this is a culture that's all about status. And it was backstabbing someone. It just felt so wrong. And I did not behave very well. Because I told them no, and then I decided the next day to go to work, and I was 22, but I went to work the next day wearing my Lion King t-shirt that had Scar and the hyenas, and the backwards said I'm surrounded by idiots. So that's how I protested. And then they sent a memo and said, from now on, clothes do not have words on them. But that's okay, I got it out of my system. That's how I handle that.
That's good. Thank you. I have a few more questions, but again, if any audience members have questions, feel free to just raise your hand. So you've written this beautiful memoir with insightful self-reflections, and throughout work you speak to your artistic endeavors. And you've always been a creative Faulk-Dickerson, and I'm wondering how the process of writing the memoir began. You decided that you wanted to write a memoir.
Oh, this question, Josie and I were talking a little bit about this earlier. I never thought I would want to write a memoir. When I left, I wanted to leave everything behind and just start a fresh new start and never look back. That's how I felt. And when you read the book, you know why. And then 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, I started to see how people, and granted, I was not the most attached to my culture because of my obvious reasons and my personal journey. But when I started seeing people talk about Arabs the way they did, talk about Middle Easterners, and even about Saudis the way they did, I felt very, I felt ashamed. I felt a sense of responsibility that what's being said and what's being repeated and what's being felt is wrong. And so I get asked by people to talk a little bit about it. So I was on panels and I did speaking gigs and and just seeing the community around me was so welcoming and supportive. I thought, well, the way to give back, first of all, to the community that's eager to know about the Middle East, number one, and number two, there were a lot of really good things about my people, my culture. I just couldn't see it, feel it, live it, and love it while I was there for obvious reasons. But as I got farther away and as I gained the life that I so desperately wanted, I didn't want to be ungrateful, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to be silent, and I didn't want to allow for those conversations to happen. And so I'd often get asked, "Are you going to write a book? When are you going to tell your story?" So the time was now. Yeah. Why and how right now, I don't know, but I guess it was just, I think it's also because my kids are older and so I felt like I have to get pregnant again and give birth. So thank you. Yes.
My culture very good. Like I ran, I wanted to Saudi like my job was so high. Children fall off. It's like common over here. And we're preaching. And it's got, they want to preach very real that kids fall off.
No. So I've never heard that in the perspective. I mean, I've heard of that belief system. It's never been a practice in Saudi Arabia. There are also no balconies in Saudi Arabia. So the houses there are built with 12-foot walls. And I mean, balcony sounds like a lead. And also, maybe balconies for apartments. Maybe that's what I understand. In Saudi Arabia, where I grew up, at least at the time of the boom, the 80s, everyone had villas and palaces. So the lifestyle was a little different. I think part of that is also probably related to socioeconomic status. Oh, I mean, oh yeah. No, you couldn't. When I would travel, I was terrified to say anything because I always felt someone was watching. If I dared say anything that was slightly against maybe the religious teachings or politics or the government, yeah, that is definitely the way we grow up. There's that fear. Also, keep in mind, most fundamental Muslim countries, if you denounce your religion or switch religions, you're punished by death. So you definitely don't want that. Whatever constitution. Witnessing.
I think I've referred to a question that we have the line of realizing poverty being known through observation. So just the childlike curiosity
Totally.
to witness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I moved to, I got there this long time. Make sure no can't be sure they can really important. Some people like, oh, can we share anything? That's scary.
Yeah.
So sometimes I go over to the mosque over here. Can you imagine to the camp like being black women who have different races. I felt so weird. I felt drunk and loving. Hey, how are you? But I understand there's more border, but sometimes I was weird. On Lucas and things. So it's good to see you. I'm probably forward.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
I got more questions.
Yes. Thank
How
you.
old were you when you went and how old were you when you left?
So I was born there.
Oh, okay.
I grew up there. My father is Saudi, and my mom is Italian. My parents met in Italy where my father was educated, moved to Saudi Arabia, well, got married, moved to Saudi Arabia, and then had their children there. So I grew up there and I was 25.
What about your siblings?
My siblings, they also left, but way after I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your mom?
My mom is also, my mom's a traveler. So she spends time with me here. She's gone back and forth. She's spent time in Italy. So she's, yeah, currently she's in the United States. But yeah, she's also embraced, I think, the idea of expanding beyond.
Which is not with your father.
My father passed away.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So she doesn't go there to live.
She comes and goes. Yeah.
But she still lives there.
She's currently
On
here.
occasion,
Yeah.
on occasion, she goes
I mean,
there.
her house is still there. She
Okay.
still has, yeah, she still has, I mean, she's built 40 years of life there, so she's got a lot of history there, a lot of friends, like, yeah. I have a contact her, so. 25. Yeah. If you want to do the math, I'm 48. I've been here 22 years. I've been-
So we're coming towards the end of the hour, but I wanted to touch on something that you said. I think that memoir has wanted to respond for cultural shift in America with the dialogue that's happening. And you said you had a responsibility, and I'm curious if you could talk about the creative responsibility to activism and how you use your art as a form of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's this idea that activism is only one form for the most part, and I know my family struggled a lot with me being an activist because in their mind activists are destructive, they're angry, and good for them. They're great. I love that. And at a time I would have loved being more of that. I just didn't have the opportunity. But I think activism comes in so many different shapes and forms. Artists are without a question activists in their own way. Meditation and yoga is a way of also showing up with activism because that's what you're doing to anchor yourself and bring peace into the world. And so for me, the activism came as a way to not allow anything to brainwash my sense of identity. And I think that was the biggest and scariest thing is as a child, knowing all these things and then the fear of needing to conform in a society and belong, that I would eventually be brainwashed because I had to survive. And there were moments in my life where I was like sucked into it. I was like, okay, maybe I do want to pray 5 times a day and be proud of being Saudi. And then I'm like, whoa, it feels like I'm suffocating. There's nothing wrong with it. It just wasn't me. And so there was this sense of like having to choose. Well, am I Italian? Am I Saudi? What am I? You know? So I think that's where the activism came, was that stance of not allowing anything to filter through and, you know, and poison the genuine.
I'm like, all football is yeah, for I said I give you that I'm like periodic, like like the 4 questions, where I come from, where I go, how I live, every religion has different answers. And so I'm like, so how have you come to the point you had an encounter with choose yourself? Have you heard of choose yourself every person?
Yeah, it's you. I mean, that's the only truth there is. It's you. But again, not to get all philosophical and sound like I've got it all figured out. For me, that's what it was. That was the truth. The truth for me was just, and again, respect to all religions, but it did not speak to me. It did not give me the opportunity to hear my own voice. And again, and that's where I think the book is so relatable. Yes, it's a story that is unique in many ways, but it's not uncommon. It's, or I should say, it's an uncommon story, but not unique in the experience of that searching and that desperate need to just like really know who you are and unapologetically go for it. Selfishly sometimes. I mean, I acknowledge that there was a lot of selfishness in me to move forward and to do the things I did. I'm not necessarily ashamed of any of them. Are there moments when I feel like pride got in the way? Sure, but that's how we grow. And that's how we learn.
Are you from this area? Like, you support like local markets? Like, I had one down, so I'm just saying, anything situation right here, but you it's just hard to search.
We can talk. We can
For sure,
talk.
thanks.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being here, Jasmine, as one of our local authors. And there are books available in the back. I can purchase a book. Thank you again, everyone. So much.
Thank you so much.